Welcome to this explainer on the true costs of real estate investing right here in the Midwest. Quick heads up before we get rolling, this is strictly educational. It's not legal or tax advice. Okay, let's dive into this. So picture this. You see a property, it's renting for $1,300 a month, and you think to yourself, wow, that's pure profit after the mortgage, right? No way. Honestly, that's the fatal flaw that sinks so many new investors. The gap between your gross rent and what actually lands in your bank account at the end of the day can be massive. If you're only focusing on the mortgage, you're living dangerously, because gross rent almost never equals actual profit. Ignoring the real cost of holding and operating a property is exactly how an investment that looked amazing on paper ends up bleeding money in reality.
So the crucial point is you absolutely need to plan for operating expenses, taking up a huge chunk of your revenue. A really solid rule of thumb from industry experts is to budget 35 to 45% of your gross rent just for operating expenses. And remember, that's a baseline. You've got to calculate that before you even think about paying your mortgage.
Today, we're walking through a complete financial reality check. We'll cover the cash flow illusion, fixed rental property costs, variable and hidden expenses, calculating real return rates, and finally, some highly actionable strategies to reduce those costs. All right, let's start with part one, the cash flow illusion, and exactly why those paper profits tend to disappear. You know, Kansas City is widely considered one of the better cash flow markets in the entire country, mainly because median home prices sit well below the national average, while rents stay really healthy. But that advantage only works if you do the right math. And this brilliantly illustrates the problem. New landlords often run their numbers assuming full occupancy, zero repairs, and absolutely no reserves. Realistic math, on the other hand, budgets for the full cost of ownership. It bakes in the inevitable gaps, the late-night maintenance calls, and all those sneaky holding costs. Okay, moving right along to part two, fixed rental property costs, which are essentially your non-negotiable expenses. These fixed costs are the baseline bills you're paying whether your property is perfectly occupied or completely empty. They don't care if things are going right or entirely wrong. Obviously, your mortgage principal and interest is usually the biggest line item here, and it's the one most owners hyper-focus on. But take a look at the rest of this list: property taxes, insurance, and HOA dues. And here's a really critical detail regarding insurance. Landlord policies generally cost quite a bit more than your standard homeowner policy. Why? Because they have to cover liability and loss of rent. You absolutely must budget realistically for that higher premium. Speaking of fixed costs, if you're investing around the Kansas City metro, you absolutely must verify the specific tax rate for your exact property address. Property taxes vary wildly by county and city across the metro area. For example, Jackson County in Missouri and the counties over on the Kansas side assess properties very, very differently. I strongly advise investors to never, ever guess on this line item. A simple miscalculation here can literally wreck your entire yearly projection. Let's dive into part three, variable and hidden expenses, otherwise known as the silent killers. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is this vital guideline. You should reserve 1 to 2% of your total property value every single year for maintenance and capital reserves alone. If you own older homes, well, that number is going to run even higher. These variable categories are exactly where profitability actually lives or dies for real estate investors. Let's break down those variable costs in a bit more detail. First up, we've got maintenance and capital expenditures. Think of big ticket replacements like a new roof, a water heater, or your HVAC system. Here's the thing, they fail on their own schedule, not yours. Setting aside a reserve each month means these replacements don't suddenly become full-blown financial emergencies. Then you've got turnover costs, doing a deep clean, slapping on some fresh paint, and handling minor repairs between tenants. That all adds up super fast every single time a resident leaves. Finally, management fees. If you try to self-manage from out of state, this cost actually shows up as your own time and the wildly expensive mistakes that come from not being a local expert. Another massive variable cost is vacancy. Every single month a property sits empty between tenants is a month of zero rent coming in, while your fixed costs just keep draining your bank account. An empty month can literally erase a full year of cash flow in the blink of an eye. To give you some context on what's possible with professional help, Alpine Property Management, who has been serving Kansas City investors since 2013, averages just 14 days of vacancy across its entire portfolio. Keeping that number aggressively low directly protects your returns. Let's move to and see how this builds into calculating real return rates and finding your true cash flow. So here's the actual formula you need to use to estimate cash flow. Let's break this down step by step.
Step 1, you start with your gross annual rent. Step 2, subtract a realistic vacancy allowance. Step 3, subtract all those operating expenses we literally just talked about, including your taxes, insurance, maintenance reserves, and management. Then finally, step 4, subtract your mortgage payment. What you're left with at the very end of that entire process is your actual, real-world cash flow. Let's pause for just a second to clearly define a vital industry term you're going to hear constantly: net operating income, or NOI. This is simply your gross income minus your operating expenses and vacancy, calculated before you deduct the mortgage payment. Think of it as the pure operating performance of the property itself. Understanding your NOI is absolutely essential because it shows you exactly what cash is left over to cover your debt before the bank ever gets paid. Now, let's pivot to an empowering note with Part 5, strategies to reduce costs and actually take control of your investment. Because hey, while you can't eliminate these expenses entirely, you absolutely can control them. Here are some highly actionable strategies to protect your bottom line. First, buy in supportive neighborhoods where the market rent actually supports the expenses you're definitely going to incur. Second, maintain the property proactively. Doing preventative maintenance stops those tiny small issues from snowballing into massive capital emergencies that erase a whole year of cash flow. Third, keep vacancy short with fast professional property turns. And fourth, screen your tenants incredibly well so you aren't paying out of pocket for property damage and dragging out lengthy eviction processes later on. A huge part of controlling those costs really comes down to having expertise on the ground. Professional management often pays for itself precisely by controlling those sneaky variable costs and aggressively reducing vacancy. A local expert prevents the wildly expensive mistakes that out-of-state or inexperienced self-managers so often make. They've got the vetted contractor networks, they know the legal landscape of the local area, and they have the proven systems to turn a property around quickly. Which leads us to our final big question. Is owning a rental in Kansas City actually still profitable in 2026? Well, the data tells us that for many investors, the answer is a resounding yes. But, and this is a big but, that profitability depends entirely on buying right and using realistic budgets that account for the full cost of ownership. Alpine Property Management builds their owner projections on real costs, not just optimistic guesses. They're drawing from 12 years of serving Kansas City investors since 2013 and managing more than 250 homes at an incredible 96% occupancy rate. Success is absolutely possible when you're armed with the right numbers and the right local knowledge. Thank you so much for joining me for this financial reality check today. I really hope this breakdown helps you confidently structure your own investment strategy. For help managing your Kansas City rental property, call Alpine at 816-343-4520 or visit alpinekansascity.com.